Okay, so hi everyone. We are doing something a little bit different today. My name is Rima Reyes, and I have the honor and pleasure and excitement of hosting the Geek Within podcast today. First time ever. Thank you. Our guest is Jeremy Wood. You might know him because he actually hosts this podcast. Secret tip. He is the Chief of Enterprise Architecture at the US Securities and Exchange Commission. He speaks on government innovation and use of technologies in government. He volunteers with the ACT-IAC Emerging Technologies Community of Interest as a government advisor. He loves mentoring those early in their career, including me. Not that I'm that early, but he loves mentoring me, and is the host of this podcast, like I mentioned before, The Geek Within, and a very, very, very good personal friend. So, Jeremy, thank you so much. Again, I'm so excited to be here. We've known each other for quite some time. I think some of it really was through work in the community. Um, just again, thank you so much. And I am so excited to kind of learn more about you, even though we've talked a lot before. But I want to know all the juicy details. So, to get started, I'm going to ask you the first big, beefy question. Tell me a little bit about where you're from, who you are, what you do, what motivates you. Dying to know.
Wow. Well, thank you first, Rima, for being willing to do this for me. When I thought about the fact that this is the 200th episode, I wanted to try to do something a little different. And you were the first person that came to mind for interviewing me because I know we've done some stuff together and you're fantastic at asking questions. So I really appreciate you doing this. My background's interesting. So my father was in the military. He was in the Air Force. He did a full career in the Air Force, 20 years in the Air Force. So I was born in Illinois at Air Force Base while he was still in training. When very early
Wow.
days, he was tagged with this is Vietnam era, right? So he was tagged with a draft number, and so rather than wait to get drafted in the Army, he went and joined the Air Force. Kind of dodged that, right? And he did aircraft maintenance. He did that for many, many years. We grew up all over the United States. I have a brother and a sister. We were all three born in different states: Illinois, Oklahoma,
Yeah.
Arkansas. And then we probably, I would say, where we developed the most was when we lived in Germany. We were in Germany for 6 years during those really important years, middle school, beginning of high school. And that culture and the European kind of feel was really interesting. And then we transitioned back to the United States, which was a culture shock when you've kind of grown up someplace else that you, at least in your memory, right, where you've been. We
Yeah.
transitioned back to New Mexico. And wow, what a difference New Mexico is from Germany if you just not just from a geographic perspective, mountains, trees, desert, but also culturally, completely different. So finished high school in New Mexico, and I stuck around for a year. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I graduated. I went to the community college, started some classes, had kind of really stuck around because I had a girlfriend who was still in high school, and I just worked at like a McDonald's, with the normal kind of early career job of choice was McDonald's for me, and I loved it. I loved it that they would pay you more for everything you were willing to learn, and so I
Wow.
learned everything. I learned it all. I took every test, worked every station, did it all just so I could make, 10 more cents or 5 more cents per hour at the time. And I loved it. But eventually, that girlfriend went off to college, left the state, and I had to say, wow, I really have no idea what I want to do. There's not a whole lot here. Where I was at was Clovis, New Mexico. Clovis, New Mexico is kind of in the middle of on the eastern side of the state. The closest cities were Lubbock and Amarillo in Texas, and I mean Clovis didn't even have a mall. It was just really small.
Wow.
And so the best option in my head that came about was join the military. My father did it. Why not? My grandfather did it. Why not? So, and I didn't even tell my parents. I just went out to the recruiting station, signed up,
Oh my God.
went off one weekend. I said, "Hey, I'll be back. I'm going to go hang out this weekend." What I really did was go to my physical and all that stuff. And then they gave me a start date. And then I think a couple days before I left, I said, "Oh, hey, guess what? By the way, I'm catching a bus. I'm going to the military." I mean, they were shocked. They were shocked.
I bet
They
your
didn't
parents must have been
expect
like,
it.
what?
Yeah, and I think I didn't really know if they'd be supportive of it, so I didn't really want to say it until it was all kind of too late, if you will. And here's the funny thing: I didn't even know what I wanted to do. All I knew is I wanted to leave New Mexico. So I did the one thing I tell everybody, and everybody ever told anybody else: when you go to a recruiter, I went to the recruiter and said, "I'll take whatever. Give me a job."
Wow.
And upon further reflection, this many years later, that was a really bad idea. I mean, there's some pretty crappy jobs, literally crappy
Yeah.
jobs in the military. And but at the time they needed law enforcement. They needed cops.
Hmm.
They needed them badly. And so I became a police officer, went off to a police academy. The Air Force has their own police academy, or at least they did now. Now they don't do law enforcement anymore. But at the time they did. And the Navy and the Air Force shared the police academy. It was a very interesting experience because in the Navy, you don't become a police officer until after you've been in the service a while, and they pick you out as somebody they think should be in that job.
Oh, interesting. Oh, very interesting.
So
Very
all the
different.
Navy people were much older than us. I was
Yeah.
19, much more experienced than us. And so it was very, very interesting. It actually worked out really well because they could kind of mentor you because you were just
Yeah.
brand new in the military. You hadn't done anything yet except basic training.
Right, right, right.
And in my case, here's an interesting caveat. I did junior ROTC in high school, and they don't do this anymore. But at the time when I joined the military, you could test out a basic training. And
What?
you could, yeah. So
Oh,
within the
wow.
first 14 days, you could take a test. And if you passed the test, you didn't have to do the rest of basic training. I was every night, I didn't sleep, I think, for those 14 days because I was under the covers with a flashlight studying those books
Wow.
those whole first couple weeks and passed that test and left basic training. Devin did whatever it is they do
Oh,
in
that's
basic
awesome.
training.
You didn't have to like suffer through, well, not that I know it personally, but it sounds like it's just a lot of
It's a
hard
lot
work
of
and
grueling
it's
stuff, and it's more
yeah,
now than it was then because, the war on terror and the whole shifting of how the warfighter stuff
right.
works. Although I think I ended up getting a lot of that same stuff I would have had
Yeah.
at being in a law enforcement academy because we had PT every day. We had lots of
Wow.
exercises. We had to pepper spray ourselves. We had to hit each other
Oh
with
my gosh.
batons. We
What?
had, yeah,
Oh,
I
that
mean,
sounds painful. Oh
you
my
had to learn
gosh.
everything to be like a regular police officer anywhere else.
Wow.
And it's not every state, but many states recognize that police academy as a valid police academy if you wanted to leave the military and go work at a police force. So it's a very interesting experience. Um,
Did you enjoy it? Like, did you like was that something that you didn't realize you were going to enjoy and like end up really diving into it or?
yeah, I think the interesting thing when I told my parents, oh, guess what? I found out because I found out in basic training what I was going to be. I mean, you leave to go to
Mhm.
basic training, you have no idea what job you're going to have if you didn't
Mhm.
pre-pick it beforehand. So while I
Oh.
was in basic training, I learned it, called my parents, told them it, and they laughed quite a bit because
Why are they laughing? Oh
they were
no.
laughing because I was a bit of a juvenile delinquent our years growing up in Germany,
Oh,
and I had
okay.
a number of run-ins with the law enforcement people on the base. And I had filled out many of those forms from the other
Oh wow.
perspective over that time frame. I mean, by a lot of run-ins, I mean more than my fair share. And so they just thought it was interesting that I got the job. That was the opposite side of that
Right.
from growing
But that
up.
probably made you even better though, like knowing the opposite side of what it's like. But anyways, so
I mean, yeah, I would say like so. My first assignment was in RAF Upper Hereford, England, which isn't there anymore, but it was near Oxford.
yeah.
And we had, a community, right? We had a housing area with people, and we patrolled the community as police officers, keep the area safe. And we had three areas we patrolled,
Mhm.
and one of them had a high school. And so then I volunteered at the local high school, and I volunteered
Oh, that's
to work
nice.
with people who were doing some of the stupid stuff I had done
Oh,
and got
that's so
themselves
good.
into trouble. And so then it was almost like counseling, except you would never call it counseling, right? Because I wasn't a trained
Right.
counselor. But conversation and talk about, hey, what's going on for real? Because I know when I acted out, it was actually something about my parents, right? And I knew if
Right.
I acted out, this is something military dependents learn. If you act out, your parents get in trouble.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh,
Oh yeah, their
interesting.
commander gets called. Their first sergeant
Wow.
gets called, and they're like, "What's going on with your kid? Why are you
Oh,
causing me stress?" And so it was a
wow.
mechanism for kids to get their parents in trouble.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, interesting. Interesting.
So anyway, I loved it. I loved that aspect of the job. Being a police officer was a lot of fun. I was single, and so I didn't have to worry about long hours. We worked long hours. I deployed. I volunteered for every deployment so that the people who were married didn't have to do that.
Oh,
So I
that's so
deployed
nice.
to a number of places where we did policing there, or we did. There was one really cool deployment to the Middle East where we did Operation Provide Comfort, where we deployed and we did food. Food. We delivered food to the Kurdish refugees. This is like right after the
Wow.
first Gulf War, and we were delivering food to Kurdish refugees who were fleeing Saddam Hussein because he was kind of taking it out on their population after we
Yeah.
kind of kicked him out of Kuwait. And so we got to go in and deliver food stuff, and it was a lot of fun. So there were really interesting aspects to that job. It was very structured. The military itself is very, very structured,
Yeah.
but then it was one more step structured um, because you had to shine your shoes. You had to show up for inspection before you went on your job.
Oh.
You had to do PT. You had all these things you had to do that were above and beyond the job. Uh, and then when I finally came back to the United States, I went from England to Beale Air Force Base in Northern California, which is north of Sacramento.
Mhm.
Gorgeous area. Napa Valley's not far. And got married. And my wife was like, law enforcement, really? Are you sure that's what you want to do? And she was thinking, long term, it's a
Yeah.
dangerous career field,
It
right? And
is. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
we're newly married, we're 20 something, 22, I think 23 at the time. And she's like, I don't know that this is. And then of course she was probably smarter than me, thinking, what does that pay in the long term as well? Like, what's that look like? And what's the wear and tear on your body? Just in that 3 years I did that job, it was a lot of wear and tear.
Yeah, I bet.
And so she convinced me to think about my options. And one of the things I had done, even though I was law enforcement, you'll love this. I automated every process I ran into. And so like for many years I was the armorer, and
Hmm.
I automated in the computer electronic forms, developed my own software, developed electronic form, developed an
Wow.
inventory process for managing our weapons and ammunition so that everybody wanted to know exactly where something was. I could print a report and show them, here it is. This is where it's at right now.
Oh, and
And
that's when
I
everything clicked.
and so when she said this, I was like, well, you know what? I do have this kind of natural computer. I mean, I'd always done programming when we had, growing up, I'd done programming on a Commodore 64, and our high school had a mini IBM mainframe. So I learned RPG. I learned BASIC in middle school on an Atari 20, what was it? Atari
Wow.
800, I think was it. So I had a background in IT, in this kind of what we call IT now, but it wasn't really called that then.
Well, it sounds like you had a passion for it, to be honest.
And
Yeah,
I honestly think, and I tell my wife this all the time because she thinks I can fix anything, and it's not true. I just have a good problem solving
yeah,
mechanism. I have in my brain, I can think through steps and think through alternatives. And so IT is perfect for that because as you
there's always
know, there's
problems.
always a problem to solve or a business challenge to overcome. And so I went to the Air Force and they said, sure, because that career field needs more people, and that career field was called communications computer specialist, then we will let you cross train. And so I went to school for 4 months and learned a new job, and then came back to the same base in California and started doing that job. And it's very interesting because at the time, this would have been 90, let's see, 94.
Hmm.
So we had a mainframe still.
Okay.
We had secure messaging. So there's in the government, military always has these secure messaging centers for sending top secret messages and routing them to the right place. It was at the very beginning of, well, I guess we had desktops. We had desktops, but they weren't hooked up to anything. Like there was no
Okay.
networking.
Right.
So like we would go to the mini mainframe. We go to the mini mainframe. We had a Unisys, actually not the mini mainframe. We had a Unisys mainframe. We'd go to the Unisys mainframe and run a job for, say, the finance department,
Hmm.
stick a huge floppy in there, take it back to our desk with that
And
data,
then,
and
yep.
transfer it to a smaller floppy and
Hmm.
give it to
Yeah.
them, and then they would take it. And so that's data processing.
Right. 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 Yeah.
Right. And while I was in that job, like within the first 6 months, somebody came through the office one day and said, hey, I'm looking for anybody in here who's ever heard of what is this, local area network? And I had learned it in our training since I had just recently cross-trained. They
Oh,
had
okay.
covered that as a module. And I was like, oh yeah, that's me. And that's when it kicked off. This was the I mean, this was the early day. That's when we first wired everything. That's when we first ran
Wow.
cables to all the desktops. That
That must
was,
have been revolutionary,
it
having like
was
some sort of like interconnected system, right? Like,
it was huge. It
wow.
changed everything. Our mainframe got a network card that was like this big, and it slotted in the computer with a little RJ45 jack, and got it onto the network. We built servers. That's when I started
Wow.
learning about routing and firewalls and setting up switches and setting up desktops on the network. We tried a bunch of different types of network. I learned WANG networks, which is a weird kind of, it was in our hospitals. So it was kind of fiber optics.
Mm.
We did coax cables, right? Token ring. I think we tried ArcNet. And then of course Ethernet kind of killed all of those things and kind of won the competition for what should be out there. But I loved it because it was the beginning stages of the Air Force learning all of that. And so
Wow.
right there on the ground floor, learning it as we did it. And I mean, there wasn't even any really good training for us. We went to local community college to learn anything because
Wow.
the Air Force
Oh,
didn't
yeah, because
have
it's so
training.
new.
Yes, yeah. They
Wow.
didn't know how to teach it to us yet. And it was changing so quickly, as you know, just as it
Yeah.
continues to do. They couldn't even keep up with it. So
Wow.
it was fantastic, and I loved it. I did a little bit of coding when I was a Microsoft Mail post office manager. This is like way back in the day, and you had a
Wait,
central
they called you a
server.
post office manager?
Oh yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So
Okay.
you had a
Really?
Microsoft post office server, and then each network segment, because it was non-routable, each network segment had their own individual post office, and then you connected them through an SMTP gateway to bring them together and
Wow.
kind of pretend they were all one thing. I mean, this is very early stages before
Yeah.
Exchange. And and it was early stages of email. And so somebody would open up the email client. I think it was just Microsoft Mail at the time. And if they mistyped the email address, there was no validation of that. That the clients weren't smart, right?
Oh
There were no
no.
rule sets for
And things
that.
would just like hang in the ether.
And so they would click send, and no, it wouldn't
Oh,
hang in the ether. It would go to a physical folder on the server. It would write the file to that location. And then
okay.
when it tried to process it, if an email address was bad, it couldn't process it. And so the entire queue backed up because it was a first in, first out file system.
Oh
Yeah.
no. So everything. Oh no.
And
Oh
so I
gosh.
wrote I wrote some tools. I think that's when I first learned oh gosh, Borland Delphi, which is kind of like I think it was like Turbo Pascal is what we called it. And so we wrote software to monitor our queues to
Oh
see
my goodness.
if a file was still there 5 minutes after it was last there, it would alert and say, "Hey, this queue is stuck,"
Oh
because there was
my
no
goodness.
tools. I mean, we were building our own administrative tools for everything because you couldn't
It's
go
not like you
to,
had like an admin center to go to.
yeah, you couldn't go
Right.
to
Yeah.
Microsoft, you couldn't go to HP, you couldn't go to
Mhm.
IBM. All of them have amazing tool sets now, but none of those things existed at that time. And so
Wow.
you kind of rolled your own, you wrote a lot of scripts, you learned a lot of scripting languages to kind of build things to monitor your network, to see you understood if something was going wrong before somebody called you, right? The whole goal of not receiving the phone call. So that was a lot of fun. And that was 3 solid years that I did that
Okay.
in California before I got a really interesting email one day. So in the military, for those who are in the military know what I'm talking about, but those who are not in the military, the way assignments work when you want to go to another base. So typically there's time frames. If you're single, it's typically 2 years. And I know this is changing now, but at the time it was 2 years, then you can move it, or 4 years if you're married, and then you can move. And that was probably driven a little bit by cost, a little bit by probably where you might have fallen in the stack of ranks.
Hmm.
And you would go and fill out what was called the dream sheet. And on the dream sheet, you would list
Hmm.
the bases you wanted to go to in the United States and the bases
Okay.
you wanted to go to overseas. And if you didn't want to go overseas, you didn't put any on it. If you want to go
Okay.
overseas, you put stuff on there. And that was the extent of your decision matrix for where you wanted to go. Then they decided
Wow.
after that, right? And so that was normal. And that's how I ended up in California.
Okay.
It's how I ended up in England. I said I wanted to go overseas. Originally, I was supposed to go to Germany, but then the Gulf War kicked off, first Gulf War kicked off, and then I got diverted to England. And
Okay.
so I got to California because I put it on my list of possible places to go in the United States because I wanted to go to the West Coast. I'd never been all the way to the West Coast. And so that's the normal way. But one day I was in my office and I got an email that went out to everybody in my career field. So every comm computer specialist in the Air Force got this email. And it said, "Hey, my name is Captain Harris and I work at Air Force Publishing in
Mhm.
Washington, D.C. And we're looking for a computer specialist to come here and manage our network, manage our servers, manage our desktops for this civilian office. And I was like, wow, that's a really interesting thing. And I've never heard of Air Force Publishing. Well, I had because they produced all the regulations and policies, the paper that we
Yeah.
had for doing our jobs. But I had never really considered they existed because there was no internet, right? It's not like you can go look them
Yeah.
up. And so I went home to my wife and I was like, hey, I got this really interesting email. Sounds like a cool job, or it sounds at least different. What do you
Yeah.
think? And there were some things weighing into this. So before I tell you her answer, which was really funny, uh, there's some things weighing into this. Everybody from my base, after they did their tour at Beale Air Force Base, vast majority of them, and computer at least, their next duty assignment was Korea. And
Oh.
when you went to Korea, you went without your family.
Oh.
So here we were. We had just had a baby. This would have been
Oh.
like, oh gosh, maybe May or April or May, and we had a baby in March
What year? Sorry, what year?
of 1996.
Okay.
And so I was due, like many of them, to go to Korea next. And so my wife was going to be stuck with the baby without me for 2 years,
Yeah, alone. Oh, yeah.
or I guess 1 year. I'm sorry, 1 year is a remote 1 year. And we had helped others. We have really great friends where we helped them when their husband went away to Korea and we stayed there and we were like, hey, we're going to care for your family. You're now our family. It's the
Aw.
military way, right? You care for each other. And so anyway, so that was on my mind, right? If I if I got this weird job opportunity, I wouldn't go to Korea.
Yeah.
And so I went to my wife and I said, yeah, here's this thing. And she's like, well, who did it go to? And I said, well, everybody in the career field. And she's like, well, I don't really want to live in DC, but what? Yeah, whatever. Sure. I mean, she thought, honestly, and she expressed it to me in no uncertain terms, there's no way I was ever going to get that job. Like, I'm just some schmo who'd been doing this job for only a couple of years. Like, I mean, I had a career, right? A
Right,
second
right,
career, right?
right.
So it's like, even though I had been in the military a certain period of time, I hadn't been doing that job the whole time.
Right.
And so I was like, okay. I responded.
Hmm.
I wrote up my what I had to say, explained why I thought I was great for the job.
Yeah.
And a couple days later, I got a call from this captain from DC. We had a great conversation, talked about my philosophy on technology, talked about how supporting people. And at the end of that phone call, he said, "Okay, great. Well, we're going to see you in 3 months. Go ahead
What?
and let your personnel office know
Job offer
that this is coming." And
done.
then boom. And that was
Wow.
it. It was like
Okay.
a basic, I did not
That's
know it was an interview. I thought we were just having a conversation.
amazing. Oh my goodness.
And
Okay.
so I had to go home from that work day because this is before cell phones, right? And I'm not going to call her
All
on the
right.
home phone. I didn't want to stress her. So I went home and said, guess what, honey? In December, we're moving from California to Washington, D.C.
Yeah. Across the country, we've got less than 3 months and go.
That's right. And we did. And we did. We got in the car, we
Wow.
packed everything up, we shipped
Oh, so
stuff
you
off.
drove. Okay.
We
Wow.
drove our car across the United States. Her parents
Wow.
lived in Nebraska at the time, so we got to stop and see them in Nebraska,
Oh,
right?
nice.
Drive the
Okay, cool.
whole way across to DC with a
Wow.
less than 1 year old in the back seat. Uh,
And had you ever been to DC before that time? Like that moment
I
of
had
time?
had one training. The Air Force finally was getting to the point where there were trainings, and I came
Mm.
to DC to the Tyson's Corner area for an HP OpenView training.
Okay.
I think OpenView even still exists, but it was basically a network monitoring tool
Right.
that used SNMP to try to track what was happening on your network. And I went for a 2 week training class,
Oh my goodness.
and that was the extent. I had actually visited Tyson's Corner Mall that week because I was like, I'd never seen a mall like this, and I took the bus and went over and saw it. Didn't have enough money to buy anything there, and most days I don't want to spend any money buying stuff there now, but it was interesting. But yeah, we moved to DC, and Air Force Publishing was an interesting office. They worked directly for the Secretary of the Air Force as kind
Oh,
of an
cool.
independent department.
Okay.
It had 50, 60 people. Three of them were military. This captain, who I didn't work for, I actually worked for a GS employee. He was a public
Oh,
affairs officer. So his role was helping them
yeah.
market their organization.
What is switcheroo? Because you were working with all military,
Yeah.
and then all
Oh
of a
yeah.
sudden you're working with civilians. That must have been so like night and day difference.
I mean, it got a lot more casual. How about I say
Okay.
that?
Okay.
Right? You're not in the same military setting where you're
Right.
working for some sergeant who's calling you on the floor for whatever. Now you're working for a GS-14, and the captain's there if you need to go to him. And of course, there was, of course, the personnel office and all that at the Pentagon. We were officially off the Pentagon, although
Oh,
we worked on Bolling Air Force Base, well, actually on the Anacostia side of Bolling Air Force Base. But it was very interesting. And the other military guy, who's still a good friend of mine, he was an admin.
mhm.
So he was there doing administrative work, but he had built their current website. He had self-taught himself Perl, and
Wow.
he used Perl to kind of generate the HTML for that website based on our publications that they were slowly digitizing. And during that time there, it was such a great opportunity because we moved from physical publications to fully digital publications.
Wow.
I learned everything about SGML and XML before it was even a thing anywhere else. Because in
Wow.
the publishing world, they used SGML, which is the higher level. Every of the all the MLs are actually a subset of SGML.
Oh, I didn't know
So
that. Interesting.
HTML, XML, they're all subsets. HTML is a much fuller publishing language than
Huh.
all the rest, and all the rest are toned down based on, browser or whatever,
Hmm.
or just data. And there's no XML like doesn't really isn't really into presentation as much. So it was very interesting. And during that time, I helped them, deploy new machines, workstations. We built, I self-taught myself coding. That was my first
Wow.
dive into VB, Visual Basic.
Wow.
And I dove into ASP. ASP was brand new, Microsoft Active Server Pages.
Cool. Yeah. Oh
And
my gosh, I didn't even know what ASP stood for. Thank you very much.
yeah,
That's I
Active
remember
Server Pages.
ASP.NET Pages from SharePoint. Okay.
Oh no, it wasn't ASP.NET, it was ASP. This is before object oriented. So it was just a scripting language, embedded scripting language.
Wow.
Think Cold Fusion. If you ever did Cold Fusion, it was the same thing really.
Wow.
And we built a full infrastructure, a multi-layered infrastructure. Now it would be like full stack development, right? Front end, back end, data, database. We had front end loaders because I mean this one website serviced the entire Air Force.
Right.
So we had 10 front end servers, web servers with load balancers in front of them, and we had big honking
Wow.
database servers and big middle layer servers. And we built all that up using COM when that was probably the closest to object oriented in the day. Now you'd call it maybe uh, service oriented architecture or APIs. There weren't real APIs then. Um, and yeah, we built that whole thing. I mean, there were contractors there, and so I was learning
Yeah.
alongside them. I took some classes at a few places here in the DC area and self-taught a lot of it, bought books and learned. So I learned coding at the same time. I already knew networking, I already knew servers,
I was
I
just gonna
already knew
say, like
desktops.
you've had like a full like round robin of like all these different technologies that you learned, which is amazing. But yeah, continue. This is fascinating.
Well, and interestingly enough, during that time I was there, this is before I got out of the military. I I thought, you know what? I've done this now, and I know it
Mhm.
so well. I feel like I know it so well. I
Yeah.
want to teach it to
Yeah.
others. And in the
Oh.
comm computer career field at the time, there was this subset of things that we did. So, like when I was in California, I taught Microsoft Office products to the staff.
Mhm.
Like we would host sessions and teach people how to like use Mail and use Word and use Excel, because that was one of our goals was efficiency, right? How to leverage the
Yeah.
tools you owned. And so
Wow.
I'd been doing that for a while. And then working for Air Force Publishing, there was a lot of that. Here's how to use this new tool that you can leverage for your publishing work. And so finally, I was like, I should get paid for that. And so I applied while still in the military, got permission to have a second job. And
Wow.
I worked for Learning Tree International, which is still around. It's a big company.
It's great. I've taken courses from Learning to.
Yep, they
Yeah.
got a big office in Reston. It wasn't that big when I worked for them. And they had offices in Bethesda and in a couple cities. They did remote training, and I worked for them actually not just for that last year I was in the military, but I worked for them for 4 years in total.
Wow.
And I traveled everywhere, and I taught Windows 95. I taught front page, probably
Woo!
something you haven't heard in a long time.
No, no, yeah,
Uh,
I haven't heard about that in a long time. Yeah.
Microsoft Access. I used to use Microsoft Access as a
Oh,
front end for mainframes even and other databases. I taught Visual InterDev, which became Visual Studio.
Okay.
And then
I
we
didn't
taught
know
Visual
that.
Studio. And then I think my biggest course I taught was Internet Information Server, Microsoft's web server. When it first came out, I taught all of the first five versions of that thing at Learning Tree. And I knew
Wow.
the course author, became a good friend. He lived in England, and I became a technical writer for him on his future iterations of that course. And
Wow.
just had a blast. That class, because I just don't realize how important the web server was at that time frame. Right now, we do a lot of those things at the client.
Hmm.
JavaScript was not a thing at that time.
Hmm.
Back then, everything was back end, and so your
Hmm.
server needed to be optimal. It needed to run efficiently. It
Hmm.
needed to do everything. So it was a great opportunity, and we taught load balancing. We taught all the cool stuff in that class.
Wow.
But right around that time, so this would have been 2000. By that point, I had been in the Air Force for a little over 9 years, and I had a decision to make because, well, as you can see, I am rotund.
No.
And I was like this as I was getting near the end of my time in the military, and that's not something the military wants. And I was just having some difficulty medically getting that resolved. And so rather than fight and duke it out, I said, I told my wife, look, we're in the DC area. There are plenty of jobs here.
Yeah.
Let's transition out. I mean, we're not from this area, but let's stay here. At that time, we still lived on Bowling Air Force Base, and so we had to figure out where we're going to live, look around Maryland, Virginia, find the right place. By that point, we had two children. What do we want to do? And so we transitioned out of the military, and my first job out of the Air Force was working for CACI. They're in Chantilly,
Hmm.
and I did surprisingly, they're a DoD contractor, big time DoD contractor, and I worked in the only commercial division they ever had. Uh,
Oh, that's weird.
and they don't have it anymore. I was there when they shut it down. I worked there
Okay.
a year, and they started shutting it down.
Hmm.
Near the end of that time frame. And then I actually worked for them for another 6 months on a 1099, helping end out their contract term
Oh,
that they
okay.
were not going to renew with their clients. But it was very interesting because I'd interviewed for the job like 4 months, 5 months before I got out of the military, got
Wow.
hired, felt really good about that. And then I showed up and they didn't know who I was. And luckily, I had a friend who worked there who was like, "No, no, no, he was really hired." And so
He's
they
meant
found
to be here. Don't
they found a
worry.
job for me in the business, and it was really
Wow.
funny. And but at that, interesting enough, from that moment on, I no longer did networking or servers, other than keeping my personal skills up. But I was purely software engineering at that point. I had
Wow.
self-taught myself all the software development stuff and said, all right, let's transition fully. And I stopped doing networking and servers other than what you need to know when you build these big systems, right? When you
Right.
do solutions development, there's a lot you need to know. And I think that background in understanding networks and how traffic routes and
Yeah, it's important.
capacity, and then servers and how memory and disk play into how your application functions really, really helped me as a software engineer, I think.
Oh, that's so
Um,
fast.
but I worked for Kaki for a year. I don't think like people call them Kaki, CACI.
I know I called
And
him khaki. I was like, wait.
and then I got a phone call from the guy I used to work for in the Air Force. He had left the government
Hmm.
and started his own firm.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to get into how all that happened, but he got a job at our old agency to do version 2 of the website we built when I was there.
No way.
So, and now it was time to do object oriented, time to do service oriented architecture, time
Yeah.
to do real robust system. And we redid it all. We rebuilt it from scratch. We were working for the Air Force at the time when we moved it to data centers. Data centers were a big
Yeah.
deal. So then it got deployed from their little closet space in their building and got moved to and St. Louis and Kansas City, where was the
Hmm.
alternate location. So we visited both those places to set up all the
Hmm.
architecture. We built the new application. We hired a lot of the old contractors who had helped us build the first one
That's so
and
cool. Like the
had a
old
blast. Yeah,
back
I had a
together.
blast. Yeah, yeah, including the guy who's the admin person. We hired him
Oh, nice.
because at that
Nice.
point he was now a networking guy. He had moved from being admin to networking. So we just had a really great crew, and I loved working for him. I worked for him for 3 years. My third
Oh,
child was
amazing.
born when I worked for him.
That is so
Uh,
cool.
we had a blast. But sometimes small businesses don't figure out how to get that next contract. And he was one of them
Okay.
who we
Oh.
never quite landed the next contract. And you put yourself out of a job, right? That's one of the goals, right? You do this task
Mm.
and you build it and you're done, and then there's no more job. So as we got to near the end of that contract, I went to him and I said, we're good friends. We've been together for a long time. I'm probably a big load on your payroll. How about I move on? And if you get another contract, call me. I'll be right back.
Oh.
And unfortunately, he never did get another contract. Otherwise, I would have been back. But, a few of us leaving did allow him to stay along for a while and still try,
Mhm.
and it just didn't work out. So I moved on from there to uh, a small firm that I'm not going to mention because I have all kinds of negative to say about it. And to be kind, I won't say the name of the company. But I worked for a very small firm that was doing business in the Army Operations Center. This was around 2004. So this is well into the war on terror.
Okay.
And we built out, and we're still building mission support systems for deploying people to Iraq and
Okay.
Afghanistan. And so I worked side by side with a lieutenant in the Army,
Hmm.
and she would tell me, here are your requirements for the day.
Hmm.
And I would build it, and she would test it, and we would deploy it. It
Wow.
was probably as close to agile as you ever get deploying. It was very rare that we didn't do a daily release, unless something was just so
Wow.
complicated you couldn't do it in one day. And that work was all on the SIPRNet on the secret side. So we worked in a vault. It was a sub basement of the Pentagon, and my cubicle was as small as it could
Yeah.
possibly be, and she
No
was in the same,
windows.
no windows. She was the same size
Yeah.
cubicle next to me. But on that contract, we did some really interesting work, and we built a system for
Wow.
deployment. I learned um, about those processes. So, when the military is developing their orders for what they want to do, and when they say orders, it's moving people or resources.
Hmm.
And when they're developing those, they're secret, right? We don't want to tell somebody what's
Of
going to happen.
course. Of course.
But in our case, we were building a system to communicate them to the National Guards and the reserve units that were being called up to go. And this was the
Oh.
first war this really happened in, where we really, pushed the state level people out to the field. And so that meant moving it from our secret network to their network, which was not secret. They were not on the secret
Right.
network. They were state-run networks. And so once an order was signed off on and cut and was within a certain period of time from execution, we could declassify it and move it to the unclass side to send
Hmm.
it to them for them to take action on it.
Hmm.
And it was very interesting because we had a literal black box. I mean, seriously, it was a black box. It looked rough and tumble like somebody had made it in their basement. And it had a RJ45 connector on one side and a big red paint on one side, and a RJ45 connector on the other with a big green paint on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah.
And somehow in the middle of there, it had analyzed
Yeah.
the messages I sent to verify whether it was allowed to go to the unclassed side.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
and we had to
That much
structure our
confidence.
messages. We had to structure the messages
Wow.
in a very specific way to
Hmm.
get it. It reminded me a lot of how we used to send messages, the secure messaging in my first career. And
Hmm.
it would come through there and it would deny it if it was bad. And you actually wouldn't know that you would actually get no notification of deny,
Wow.
but you would know that it never reached the other side. And so you kind of assume. It was very interesting. And then on the other side, it was a portal that was accessible to the guard in the reserve to access and find out what their orders were going to be and then take
Wow.
action. So I love that job because it was very warfighter mission,
Yeah.
very, tightly knit. I had never worked for the Army, right? I was an Air Force guy.
Yeah.
It was such a tightly knit organization who really supported one another. And of course, because it was the Army Operations Center, we knew everything that was happening in theater. And
Hmm.
so everything that happened came through there. And so anyway,
Wow.
it was an awesome job. And we had some other small projects we worked on. I think we worked on something related to drone setting up the code for how setting the regions for drone for auto patrolling
Oh,
so that they
okay.
wouldn't intersect in the airspace. So it would basically would send them GPS coordinates of what box to stay in, and then you could
Wow.
set them on a kind of autopilot, and they would just kind of roam until.
You're the drone FAA.
Well, I mean, I wrote code. I did not do. I know nothing about drones. I wrote code on creating a
Oh,
coordinate system, right, that they could
that's
then upload to
cool.
the. So there was a lot of cool stuff we did there, and then because I did not like the guy who owned the company, and I did not like his business
Hmm.
practices. I stayed around for a year, moved on to American Systems, which is a well-known company here in the DC area. Um, Loved them, had a blast. I did full client work, so I had a new challenge. So we like to talk about IT challenges. Now I had a challenge where I'm supporting Army Criminal Investigative Services, which kind of went back to my law enforcement time.
Hmm.
And they do investigations. So they show up on site of a crime scene. And the computer program we wrote for them on their laptop was where they were cataloging the evidence.
Hmm.
And then that record they created would have to be synced to a server because they had no connectivity in the field.
Wow.
And so when they got connectivity, it synced it to the server, and then it kicked off a workflow to follow that evidence from this throughout the course of this entire investigation. And if it
Wow.
if it went to the court systems, all the way into the court systems system, all the way to disposition of whatever
Mhm.
happened after
Right.
that. And so, but we had this
Wow.
cool technology challenge of having a full client that worked in a disconnected mode, but then could synchronize later. And then that could happen multiple times as they continued through the investigation and collected more evidence or learned something new. They were cataloging everything they learned about an investigation into this system. And that was the first programming job I'd ever had that was CMI level 5.
Oh my goodness. That's
So we
hard to
had two
accomplish.
we had two levels of peer reviews, a tester and a QA agent who tested everything we
Hmm.
did. And you'd go to a peer review and just get shredded. It was, if you couldn't defend why you built it the way you did, you got shredded and had to go back and build it again or come up with a better reason.
Getting our faces. Well, this sounds like the first true like offline mode of something, right? Like it was almost like you could work offline and then reconnect and get all your new data and then come back and
Yeah, we had to get really innovative in the code for it to do that because at the time there weren't native database synchronization tools.
yeah.
So we had to have a localized database where it was stored. Actually, I don't even think it was a
Wow.
real database. I think it was like textual files because I don't think there were even local database technologies available. Oh, I think maybe like Access. I think we used Microsoft Access
Mm,
now that I think
my
about it.
favorite tool.
Yeah. And then we wrote code that could do the synchronization. And but it had to authenticate. We had full tokenized authentication because when you did the upload, it had to do it on behalf of that user. It was a very,
Wow.
very interesting project from a technology perspective. And I like that. I like learning. I like every time I
Mhm.
took a job, I learned something completely different, but still within my sphere of,
Yeah, it sounds like
technology.
it.
And then I only was at Air American Systems for a year. It felt like much longer because that job was so cool. But one day, I had a guy come up to me in church of all places, and he said, "Hey, so and so tells me that you do software development." I was like, "Sure, that's a true statement." He's like, "Well, I work for the USDA, and I wondered if you had ever considered going into government work." And I thought
Mm,
I hadn't really ever thought about it. I was having a blast
hmm.
doing this consulting gig. And there was even a couple other small companies I worked at on the side. For most of my career, I always had a second thing happening,
Wow.
whether it was a training job or
Yeah.
consulting, or I even had my own small business where I did consulting for CPAs and built computer systems in CPAs' offices, like in strip malls. I always had something going on there, and I know I glossed over that and didn't
Wow.
even mention it. Um, so I thought, wow, this is interesting. I had never really thought about doing the government because I've been so busy. But then when he brought it up and I thought about it, I realized so when you're in the military and you go 20 years, you retire and you get a retirement check.
Yeah.
When you're in the military and you do 9.5 years or 19.5 years and you leave, you get nothing.
Yeah.
You get no privileges to go on a base, you get no health care. I mean, you
Like you're
eventually you
completely
get
cut off, right?
eventually you get some VA support,
Hmm.
but you really get nothing. And
Yeah.
so I learned that you could buy those years into the federal retirement system.
Oh.
And so I was like, wow, okay, well, that would make those years worth something. So I said, okay, I'd be interested. I contacted him and said, yeah, let's talk about this. I gave him my resume. He went off to do whatever he needed to do to build his position. I think 6 months later, he called me up and said, "Hey, you should go apply for the job. It's finally out there." That's the government official,
Wow.
And I went, looked for the job, and I applied for it. And I interviewed. I think they interviewed 10 different people for that job. and
Wow.
two of us got hired, myself and one other guy who I keep in touch with. And we each ended up working for doing different things. But that was my first foray into government, and I worked for the Agricultural Marketing Service, which is a small agency. USDA has got, I think, 20 plus
Hmm.
agencies, smaller agencies associated with the
Yeah.
USDA umbrella as a department. And agricultural marketing was interesting in that they had things like the Got Milk program is in
I was just about
agricultural
to ask him,
marketing.
like, what is agricultural marketing? So, okay.
Yeah,
So, got milk is an example. That's a good one.
yes.
It's a very
Their
good one.
role, their larger role, I think at the highest level role is to get people to know that there are products to buy in the agricultural space
Got it.
to
Okay.
help farmers sell their products.
Cool.
And they monitor the markets in that
Yeah.
area, and I'm sure they do what government does and fiddle in them. I was not part of that, but I did work on a couple projects that were really interesting. One was for uh, we built a food nutrition dashboard that
Oh,
all of the elementary school nutritionists in America would use to plan their menus.
yeah. I remember this in like public because I went to public school, right? They had like a reference card from, I think, USDA, right? About meal
Oh yeah, the
plans.
USDA had the food. I think is it USDA had the food triangle? I can't remember if it was USDA or
Yeah, I
another
thought it
agency because there's so
was.
many agencies in the food space. But food triangle was part of my concern, right? When we built the
That's so
system,
cool.
and we knew all the nutritional data of every element that somebody could add to their menu. And
Wow.
interestingly, because we were the marketing side, what it really was a tool to tell them, oh, okay, you wanted this on your menu. By the way, here are programs through the government where you can get the ingredients or the products to fulfill your menu.
Oh, okay,
And in
cool.
some cases they were subsidized, so they were cheaper for you
Hmm.
because let's say in America there was a bumper crop of cherries one year. I'm just using an example. I don't actually
Yeah,
know
yeah,
that we grow cherries in the United States, but let's just example purposes. Let's say there was a
yeah.
bumper crop of cherries one year, and the farmers are going to lose money by the leaps and bounds
Mhm.
because you oversupply and the cost drops, right?
Right,
And the government does something where they go and buy all that excess, and then they
right.
turn around and sell it at a reduced price to
Cool.
companies that make products specifically for food menus at elementary schools.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay, interesting. Wow, I didn't know that.
So I learned a ton in that job. We did some really interesting
Wow.
things. Um, and I had a blast. And that was my, government speak. I was a GS 13. So I had convinced them to hire me as a 13
That's
because
good
of
because it's
my,
pretty high, right?
it's
Yeah.
pretty decently high. It's still technical. I had a large enough career at that point that I could
Yeah.
say, look, this is what I want to come in as. And he
Yeah.
had to do some rope-a-dope with HR, but they had the money and they made it work. And so they brought me
Awesome.
in. And so I stuck around there for a bit, and then I was like, okay, well, I'm ready to move up in my career. And the next role I had my eyes on was to be a branch chief, which is a manager.
Hmm.
And so they didn't have that. There was no career path. I was working in the business area. I wasn't even working in the IT department. I was working in the business area
Oh,
as an embedded IT person helping with
got
their
it.
projects.
Okay.
At SEC, where I'm at now, has something similar. There are embedded IT people, and a few of the agents I've been at have that. Not all of them. Some of them centralize it fully. Some of them have fully decentralized, and some of them have a
Hmm.
little bit of hybrid. Every agency is slightly different. But I applied for a job at the Food Safety Inspection Service, which is also a USDA agency,
Okay.
and I got the job. And so then I became branch chief for their software development shop. And interestingly enough, I had Accenture. Accenture was my contractor for one of our systems and within my first week, they came to me and said, "Yeah, we have a big problem in our software that we built for you."
Oh no. Oh no. So you just inherited a
And I
massive
said,
problem.
"What?" They said, "Well, here's the thing. We designed our architecture around our requirements. And then over the last couple of years, 2, 3 years, the requirements have grown, but the architecture wasn't designed to facilitate them. And so we've just been cobbling to the best of our ability onto this
Oh no.
architecture, right? All of
Oh
these
no.
features. And so
Okay.
what we need to do in today's world, we'd say we're going to take a couple sprints to retool, right?
Hmm.
And do technical debt, reduce technical debt. And that's basically what I had to go. Then within my first week, I had to go to some SES in charge of the
Oh,
business in a meeting. I never met him. And when he came to me, he said, what's going on with this system? And I said, well, sir, I got some bad news. We need to re-architect. That's going to take X amount of time. I can't remember what we said, maybe a month.
Oh no.
I don't know, maybe a couple of weeks. I can't remember exactly what it was. I think it was looking
Hmm.
closer to a month or maybe even a month and a half. And we're going to need to retool it. And here's why. And here's what you're going to get if we do it. And
Smart that you included that.
he
Like the
goes, okay,
yeah.
do it. And I did it. And we did it. We took the time, we spent it, re-architected it.
Wow.
We did a lot of architecture sessions, re-solutioning, and we transitioned all the code. This is a
Wow.
Java-based application. But we did it. It was very successful. And then after that point, now you can cobble anything you wanted onto it. We built the architecture to be much more flexible.
Wow.
And and so I felt really good, within my first week though, of having to go and explain to an SES. And up to that point in my career, I'd never met an SES. And
Like
so,
surprise. Hi, bad
yeah,
news.
it was a great experience. I had a great boss at that time. His name was Chuck Riddle, great friend, good mentor.
Hmm.
And he pops up in from time to time in my career from that point on. And so yeah, things were going well. Maybe a year or two after I got there, he said, I'm going to try something different because this our division was business applications, and he ran my shop, which was software development.
Hmm.
We had a database focused shop, and then we had a shop that was focused towards our laboratories, I believe. Um, and because we had three microbiological labs that did all the testing for the food safety work, but they had technology associated with it, and so it's
Okay.
its own technology segment. Um, in any case, so he says I'm gonna lateral to run the operations side of the house because he wanted to build out his resume.
Okay.
He had CIO on the mind. He'd already done project management and program
Hmm.
management before he came to FSIS. Then he ran business applications. Now he wanted
Hmm.
to, expand his horizons.
Yeah.
So, and he said, what I want you to do is apply for the job when I vacate it. So I was like, oh, so
Wow.
I applied for it along with no, I wasn't the only one, but and it wasn't the only one in our office that did it, which made for interesting things later. Um,
Awkward.
and then they took a long time to decide, government being government. We rotated in acting, and all three of us who were three branch chiefs in that division, we all acted in that job.
Wow.
So they got to see all of us in action, through the time. And then finally they announced, and I got the job. It was interesting.
Wow.
I had to then, for the first time in my life, I had to manage my peers, my previous peers, the ones that, when you're peers with somebody and you all talk crap about your boss, and then now you're the boss.
Whoops.
And not that we were talking negatively, we all loved
No,
Chuck,
no, I
but
know. It's
there's
just
days. There
it's
are
a different
days.
dynamic. Yeah,
Even
yeah,
when
yeah.
you
It's
like the person, there are days. Anyway, and eventually that worked out. I figured out how to be a better leader. I figured out I like at
Mhm.
that time I wrote on my whiteboard, tell them what, not how,
Mm,
because I was a solutioner. I did a lot of
mhm,
solutioning. Even as a branch chief, I did a lot of solutioning because we had a lot of contractors
mhm.
that did our work for us. We had some federal technical staff who also did a lot of coding. Um, but I still ended up doing a lot of solutioning. And so
Wow.
when I took on that GS15 job, I was like, well, I can't do that anymore. This is a whole different role. I can't do that. And so
Yeah.
I had to reset myself from a leadership perspective. I read a ton of books. My mom at the time was a store manager for Walmart, and she had a collection of
Oh,
leadership
wow.
organizational books. And we were sharing books back and forth and tech
Oh, that's so fascinating.
and
Oh, that's
you
what a
know,
great
hey,
resource.
you should check out this kind of planner tool, tracking tool,
Yeah.
and we just really kind of reinforced and had conversations on how to run, an organization and be good at it. And I loved that time, had a blast doing it.
Yeah.
But shortly after I got the job, so remember that success I had within my first, year, 6 months, actually even a couple months, where I re-solutioned something. Within my first year of becoming a GS15, I was walking through the halls because, this is when we were all in the office. I was walking through the halls and the deputy CIO came over to me and she said, hey, you need to go see the CIO. Janet wants to talk to you. I'm like, oh no, what's it about? She's like, well, we're gonna create a tiger team to hunkered down on a project that was having some major problems. The contractor was not delivering. It was well over budget at that point, and they had not delivered working
Wow.
solution.
Okay.
And you had success. And previous success means you get opportunities.
Yeah.
And I honestly said, I don't want to do it. I said, I'm retooling myself to be, in leadership, a manager. I don't really want to do that. And she said, well, here's the thing. You are. So
Oh,
go see the
wow.
CIO. And so then she tagged me to say, you're going to lead this Tiger team. I said, okay, well, if I'm going to have to do it, I have no choice. I can't opt
Wow.
out. Then I want to pick my team. And so I got the best pick of the project managers. I got the best pick of the technical staff and of the operations people because we made a team that was kind of a composite of the organization. And they still had to
Hmm.
do some other work for the rest of the organization, but
Okay.
they had to do my work first. And then we
Wow.
got a contractor, a new contractor because the other contractor had been failing, and spent as small amount of money as we could, and basically built the whole thing, at
Wow.
least to a functional state, right, to an actual deployable
Yeah.
state. And this was the time frame of Agile before you really called it Agile, and probably during that
Okay.
time frame it started slowly being called Agile, and we did sprints and but we still had like the classic project management. What were those charts called? Oh gosh, my brain.
Gantt charts?
Not
No.
the Gantt charts, but like the ones that told you the critical path.
Oh.
I don't know. I never really got my PMP, and I will never get a PMP. But there were certain charts when I read their PMP books that were certain charts on how to find the critical path. And when you have a project that's broke, you
Oh.
needed to find the critical path. And so we did this whole diagram to figure out the critical path for our
Wow.
project. And that's a very classic project management
Yeah.
tool that is never done in Agile. It's never done in sprints and Scrum. They don't do I have a lot of opinions about Scrum and Agile in the software development world and how we don't architect well a lot of times when
Hmm.
we do it. But we were trying to make sure we kind of did a hybrid there. In any case, delivered. But it was a very hard year, 16-hour days. I
Oh
got an
my goodness.
award. I got an award, but it was my award citation. It mentioned my cot, which was my friend in my office because I slept in the office many times.
Oh,
And
I thought you were saying Mike Hot, and I was like, oh, is that the name of the
no,
person? No, no, you were saying my cot,
my
like your
cot, my
sleeping bag.
sleeping bag and
Oh my
platform
goodness.
that I would
How
fold
does
up and
that
stick in the corner.
work? How does
And
that work in government, working 16-hour days? That's
it was
insane.
rough. In some cases, I was like, it's just not worth going home. And so I'd stay at the office
Oh,
because they had a shower facility and gym, and
right.
I had a bunch of clothes in a closet. This is classic government office
Wow.
space with where you could hang your clothes in a closet and whatever. And so, yeah, worked a lot. But at the end of that time frame, I was burnt. I was burnt
Of
so
course.
much that I was like, I got to find another place to go where I can get some family life because I had three kids and I
Okay,
wasn't
so at that
seeing.
point you had your third kid, right? So then, okay, so now,
Before I joined government, I had my third kid. So
okay.
I just wasn't seeing my kids. And so
Wow.
my wife and I talked about it. I didn't want to leave government because I'd already
Yeah.
learned the flexibility of moving from one government agency to another. But I was already at GS 15, so it wasn't going to be necessarily a promotion. I wasn't really ready for SES. So I started looking around and I learned about this agency you've heard about because that's where I was at when we met, and that was Millennium. Oh, no, no, no. Actually, I'm skipping one. I'm sorry. I reached out to my friend Chuck, who had been my previous boss and was now my peer,
Yeah.
and he had left to become the CIO at the government printing office. I think they're
Oh,
now called the government publishing office. They changed their name because they're
okay.
not as much physical print focus as they used
Right.
to be. And
Wow.
I reached out to him and he had a job. And he said, well, you got to apply, you got to compete. I'm going to recuse myself because we know each other, all the way, through the process. And the interviews will be the interviews. And I got the job. And so then I moved over to
Oh,
to GPO, got to work for my friend again. Well, prior
yeah.
boss and friend. And I love him. He's fantastic. I would work for him any day. And
Oh.
I ended up doing enterprise management. So instead of software dev, I was now running
Mhm.
the PMO. I was running configuration management, budget, procurement, testing, and policy. So
Wow.
everything that didn't fit somewhere else in IT was in
Yes.
this office.
Oh, so then you
And
basically got all the experience of that stuff that you were missing before.
that's right.
This really was the icing on the cake, then I
I
assume.
loved it. I loved it because I got to delve into how do we formulate the budget?
Mm.
How do we control releases
Wow.
into the production environment? How to how do we allocate project management resources, and
Okay.
just everything. It was a fantastic job, and I did that
Wow.
job for a while. But like in every other instance, eventually there's a challenge that needs to be solved. And Chuck came to me and said, I know you're really enjoying doing this job, but I need you to go back
Mhm.
into the application world.
Oh
I need you to
no.
take over this division that it needs some help. And
Yeah.
so I went back into the business applications world. I think it was actually called Applications Development and Management Division. We had a mini mainframe. We had
Wow.
uh, our own implementation of Oracle Financials. Was not a shared service. It was our own Oracle Financials. We had to do mobile apps because that was the time that the government decided every agency
Oh,
needed a mobile app. And
like a
so,
BlackBerry mobile app, I assume. I don't know what year is this, but
no,
about
this would
that.
have been Android and Apple.
Okay,
So
okay.
I reached out. In fact, I reached out to Microsoft and I said, you know, we develop on your stack. We've never made a mobile app before, but now we're being told to do so through an
Yeah.
executive order. How do I do it? And the guy I reached out to is very helpful. He's like, here's the deal.
Mhm.
I'm going to hook you up with technical resources. We're going to make this happen for you. We'll pay for any third party we bring in to help you with this.
Oh, wow.
They
Okay.
had a program for that. But he says, what I want you to do is come with me to this ACT-IAC working group. It's called the Mobile Applications Working Group that was trying to
Hmm.
help government. It was writing white papers and hosting sessions to help government figure out how to do this as a
Got it.
team.
Okay.
And so we had the ACT-IAC, which I've been participating in forever, and other people who watch the podcast have heard me mention and interview people who also participate with it. You know, it brings government and industry together specifically around topic areas to solve problems in that
Yes.
space. And so this mobile applications working group was perfect. And I got involved
Wow.
and we did a lot of really cool sessions and had a lot of agencies present how they were solving this problem and how they were building apps. And through that, we were successful in deploying our app. And
Wow.
yeah, and then I learned about this community that I've been participating with ever since. That working
Wow.
group, of course, went by the wayside, but there are lots of communities of
Yeah.
interest and working groups to be involved in. So loved it, loved it. And
Wow.
then I don't remember exactly how long I was there because I did the two different jobs, but I
Mhm.
finally was like, all right, I'm ready for something different again. So
Yeah.
I kind of modernized everything. We moved everything into the cloud.
Hmm.
We got rid of all the on-prem applications. Things were smooth. And when we get to a point where there's nothing left to solve, it gets a little boring.
Yeah. Because then you're like, what else is there to be done? And you seem like you're a fixer of sorts.
I
So,
love problem sets
yeah.
and I love trying to figure out how do we get past the problem set. So I felt comfortable. I felt like I had achieved what I set out to achieve. And even though Chuck was great to work for, I looked out through the community agencies, you know, through USA Jobs to see what
Yeah.
else was out there. And this is when I learned about Millennium Challenge Corporation.
Right. And yeah,
And
that's what we met you. You were working there.
yes,
Hmm.
and this, for those who don't know it, I know I've had some guests on from it talk about it, but it's a small agency in the foreign aid space. They do economic development overseas. It's very focused. The money is not just given to the country, but it's focused on the project. They pay the bills as it's built, whatever it is, whether it's a power plant or a water treatment
Yeah.
plant, or uh, and it's just it does some amazing work with a small number of people. That agency only has 330 federal employees.
Wow. I'd never
So,
heard of it before until I met you. I was like, what is
and what I
this?
loved about it is the IT department only had 14 people. So here I was working at a small
Oh.
business again.
Oh, but still with the government
But in the government.
twist or flair.
So,
Yeah,
because
that's awesome.
everything we did, we leveraged each other to try to get it done. I mean, we had
Oh,
contractors that did a lot of the work, but when you're trying to make
wow.
decisions, you know, the CISO, who's a good friend of mine, would call me in and say, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And I would call him over when I'm doing something, and we'd have these conversations
Like, what do you think? Yeah,
as a group, like, how are we
that's
going to solve this
amazing.
problem?
That's amazing.
And I loved it because then you got to delve into all the problem spaces, whether it was a service related thing. I helped roll
Right.
Windows 10 out there. I was in the room teaching people, open up your laptop and log in with this credential,
Oh my
right?
God.
That would not happen at a normal agency.
Right.
And that's also the agency. I did three jobs at that agency.
Okay.
I did enterprise applications when I first got there, which was
Okay.
a really cool mission because of their foreign aid focus. They have one major system that supports that effort that the foreign countries submit their project data into to show where they currently are on their project, how much
Okay.
money they spent, how much money they're going to need in the next month.
Okay.
all that sort of stuff. I got a trip to Africa to go talk to my
Oh,
customers
that's
in two
cool.
different countries, and they told me, and I'll tell you, it's when I learned they don't sugarcoat things in some other countries. And they just told me exactly how bad my stuff was, and so that was that, but which was great because then you could fix it. So then we went back and fixed
Oh,
it.
wow.
And I did that job for a while, and then a CIO change happened, and they
Hmm.
shifted me into an enterprise architecture role, which was interesting, and
Okay.
mostly because we weren't doing enterprise architecture at all. And so that CIO had come from a place where that was an important aspect of IT.
Yeah.
And so I said, sure, I'll take it on. Let me do it. And somebody I had been
Wow.
mentoring and uh, who brought into our department there, very fortunately got promoted into my previous position, and very happy for her. And she did an awesome job. And so then I started doing architectural focuses, solutions
Okay.
design, the whole network, all of our
Wow.
tooling, and then did that for a while. And then we had another CIO change. And then this CIO came in and said, policy and planning is our most important thing that we're not doing now. Because I
Oh,
kind of,
interesting.
there wasn't much else to do in the architecture space. I think we had kind of
Right.
locked it down, and policy and planning became the new thing. And that includes
Huh.
things like strategic planning, right? We hadn't had a strategic
Okay.
plan in a long time, and we needed one. That's a
Like for
requirement.
IT specifically, like how you,
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Is it, it doesn't involve like mission statement creations and like all that stuff, that kind of thing, or
Exactly.
no? Okay.
Visioning, mission
Okay.
statements, strategic plans, tactical
Wow, you've
plans,
done it all. My
and
goodness.
I also became kind of a central point for all of our procurements. I did all the
Okay.
statements of work for every procurement.
Oh, wow.
I had a team working with me that did that work and got really good at procurements, at really good at creating innovative contracts that met the need, but also could support surge activities that
Hmm.
come about, and that's really hard to plan on a contract when you're thinking you got
Hmm.
to plan your contract out you got to think 5 years ahead. What am I going to do
Yeah.
on this contract? How
Yeah.
much money am I going to spend? How do I justify that I'm going to spend that money? Is my budget ever going to really be there?
Wow.
And so you have to plan all that out. It was a lot of fun, but it's also a time when I became the Microsoft 365 lead for the agency. And so then I became
Mm-hmm.
the expert on all of Microsoft 365. I helped our records management team implement records management. I taught people how to use Power Automate.
Wow.
I exposed the agency to the concept of Power Apps and how they needed to replace InfoPath, and we did major projects to get rid of InfoPath and move to Power Apps. We started down the road of what you call zero trust today. We had
Hmm.
started down that road because our CISO was so forward leaning. We'd already
Wow.
started down that road, but we used the Microsoft Suite to solve a lot of those problems.
Hmm.
And I love that job. And that's when I started a Microsoft user group targeted at government,
That's right.
M365 for government user group. That's when you and I met.
Yeah, I came to visit once. Yep. Hmm.
Yep. Well, we met at Ignite, I think in Orlando, because you were coming to speak about, you were the only person bold enough to come in front of a bunch of government people and say, yeah, here's what Microsoft's doing for government. And because up to that point, they had zero, like, you
Yeah.
had to get it through like some sales rep or something. You could never get information straight from Microsoft on what was happening in the government space. And you showed up, and I mean, you had a room full of people who were ready to ask you questions that, of course, you didn't necessarily have all the answers to, but you were gracious
Oh, that's so
and
funny.
everybody
Yeah.
cared. And because you were there, we figured Microsoft actually cared about the space.
Yeah, it was a
Uh,
community, and it was the last session of the last day. And I
yes, it was.
remember,
And we caught a taxi together to go to the
y-
airport.
yes, yes, and you were wearing your shirt with the cats on it
Oh
because
my
of your
gosh,
daughter. It
yes,
was so
yes.
great. It was awesome. I was like, this guy seems really cool. He seems like
Yeah.
he's a really good dad. Like, anyways, so
It was nuts. It was nuts. And but that started, the Microsoft 365 stuff. And then
yeah,
I started speaking for user groups. I brought my daughter into that, which is, how I
that's
started.
awesome.
One of the reasons I started the podcast was to expose my daughter to the people in our community and how they got to where they were. And then you and I we co-host the Microsoft 365 government community call together. You and me and Sarah Gilbert and Jay Leask did that monthly podcast for a while. And who knows,
Yeah,
maybe we'll do it again sometime. But right now we're all too busy for it. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But that was also another thing because we all are passionate about government. It was
yeah,
specifically focused on government and
yeah.
monthly telling people here's what's going on in the Microsoft space for government.
Well, it also
So
sounds, Jeremy, though, that you have like a really big teaching or like education arm about you. Like it sounds like throughout your entire career, no matter what you were doing or where you were at, you were always like trying to help other people learn too, which I think is really fascinating. I don't think I knew that about you, that was really consistent, which is really cool. That's really awesome.
Yeah, it's something I think that threads through there. I mean, I volunteer with a bunch of youth organizations. We don't, Boy Scouts and stuff like that for my kids,
Yeah.
and that filled that gap. And then, of course, when the kids grew out of that, I needed to fill it some other ways. And the
Yeah.
community we have around Microsoft's technologies, which I think solve a lot of great problems.
Hmm.
The community is amazing. The community I have at ACT-IAC, which is more broadly just government problems and technology
Hmm.
writ large, and actually they even have communities of interest around, workforce management and
Oh wow.
procurement, and so those communities are fantastic to participate in. And
Okay.
so I've learned, that I can be a good participant in those things. And so, yeah, and now I've been at the SEC for going on 3 years,
Okay.
and I've been doing enterprise architecture, and enterprise architecture is a little different at every agency, so it's been fun to get to kind of figure
Yeah.
out what does that mean for the SEC, beyond the you know the regulations that say you will do XYZ for enterprise architecture, produce these artifacts, produce these documents, but also, what does it mean for how we can help the rest of the agency succeed in what they're trying to accomplish with the right
Hmm.
technologies? How do we keep technology creep to a minimum, which is
Hmm.
always hard because there's so many great technologies out there, but it's so hard to support them all. This is something we're starting to teach people. And I think it's relevant for many organizations that somebody will say, well, the tool I want to implement is free, but it's not free. It requires some service
Yeah.
desk person to know how to install it,
That's a really good
some
point.
SOP to be deployed. Somebody's going to have to
Yeah.
patch it, which means now security's monitor needs to know how to monitor it. And so
Yeah.
there's this sunk costs that exist every time you bring something new into the environment that
Huh.
people just don't consider, even if the
Oh,
tool
that's
happens to
interesting.
be free.
Yeah.
Uh,
I
and
don't think I've ever heard anybody mention that, like, or talk about this in this way. That's a really fascinating thing to think about. Yes.
I mean,
How does it?
the same can be said about Microsoft technology, right? Power Automate,
Hmm.
fantastic workflow tool, does all kinds of cool stuff. I use it on a daily basis to make my job easier for myself and
Yeah.
to build work processes. Um, but it has a cost in
Yeah.
learning. It has a big cost in learning. If you want to get it to do what you want to, what you want it to do, it
Or
has
if
a
something
big,
breaks and you have to call support and like all
that's
that stuff.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yep.
And also, how do you make sure somebody else knows how to do it if you leave?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. The passing on of
Yeah.
information and content and ownership. Yeah. Yeah. No, it
Right.
makes total sense.
So no technology is ever free.
Hmm.
Every technology's got some sort of technical debt that comes with it. So, and somehow through all this career, I completed a bachelor's degree because I think I had 3 kids by the time I finished my bachelor's. I finished my
Wow.
master's degree just because I wanted to kind of get the master's gave me a kind of a strategic outlook on organizational running an
Yeah.
IT organization that I hadn't had. So wow. Yeah, that brings us to today.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So I don't know if this is a complex question or not, but looking back at your entire career and based upon all your varied experiences, is there something that you would have or could have done differently, or that something could have been done differently so that you could have gotten ahead quicker? Like, is there anything that kind of comes to mind there?
Yeah, when I look at my career and I think about what could be better for everybody else who's coming behind me that they don't have to like
Mm.
go through some of the grind or some of the um, hurdles that I might have had in my career.
Yeah.
Let's let's talk technical careers, right? When you start a technical career like I did, I got every certification known to man. I got
Wow.
all I got as many as I could get. Back at that day, it was Novell networking. I got all the Novell. I got all the Microsoft
Wow.
certifications, and I kept getting them. I got all the whatever some new organization popped up and said, we got here's a certification, and here's one. I got all of the certifications, and I focused on that a lot. And then I focused on, going to college. And when I went to college, I, other than the required math and English and stuff like that, all of my classes were firmly IT classes, firmly
Okay.
some aspect of IT. And if I had to tell somebody who was planning their technical career now, uh, I would say, are you ever going to be a manager? And if you are, don't do that to yourself.
Don't take the certifications,
Well,
or don't do
don't
the.
be so one dimensioned.
Okay. Okay.
Because if you ever have a desire to move beyond technical, you've
Hmm.
got to build your other skills. You got to
Mm,
build understanding of how budgets work and finances
got it.
work. You got to understand how companies buy things.
Hmm.
You got to understand how to manage people, the
Hmm.
motivations behind why they do what they do, and the things that you need to put in place to encourage them to perform well.
Right.
And I would say I've learned all of that, but I learned it very hardly through books and my own experience of mistakes. And if I had thought about it, I always had a plan. And I'm not probably not going to achieve my original plan. My original plan was to be a federal CIO. Now that I'm
Oh,
in government for as long as I've been, I don't know that I want that job. It's a horrible job. And there are some great people who do good things in that job, but they never do it for very long. It's not a long-term job.
yeah.
So, but still, I knew I always wanted to get into leadership and management in the
Hmm.
technical space, but yet I didn't do any education for that to plan for that. And
Oh, okay.
so
Until you went to get your master's degree.
even when I got my master's, it was focused on, I mean, I guess it was strategy, right? But I would
Hmm.
say like accounting is important.
Mm.
How to write
Hmm.
a policy. So writing, how to
Okay.
communicate change, how to make change happen. That's change is
Yeah.
not something that came out of my master's degree. There was nothing about change management in my master's degree,
Yeah. That is a big one.
right?
You're right.
How
Yeah.
do you get people on board with a major
Yeah.
change? Like you're moving from SharePoint on-prem to SharePoint online.
Yeah.
How do you get people to adopt to that change and
Right.
understand what not to do anymore and what to do now? And I think that's not a technical skill. Technically
Mm.
understanding the technology is important, but
Yeah.
getting people to make that shift is not a technical skill. It's a
Like
different
understanding
kind of
human behavior and that kind of thing.
yeah. So I
I agree.
really think, and I do a lot of mentoring. I love to mentor, and that's just the kind of stuff I talk about in the conversations. Where are you trying to go? What is your ultimate
Yeah.
goal? Don't stovepipe yourself. Uh, I was very fortunate, the roles I had, I didn't. I was lucky. I didn't pick those roles. I went where people were that I wanted to work for, and I got lucked into the fact that they gave me a good role. That then
Yeah. It sounds like you
broadened my horizon.
gravitated towards people that you knew that you liked, like
Yes.
good working environments. It seems like that's what you valued, which is really cool and really fascinating.
Yeah. As a funny aside, Chuck also works at the SEC. Uh, and I don't work for him, but I know him, and I reached out to him before I
Yeah.
came to the SEC to say, "Do I really want to go there?" And he said, "Yes, you really want to go there." So I was like, "Okay, then I will apply." Um, so yeah, knowing people, right, is a big thing.
Right.
But looking back, I mean, I really wish I had been more considerate of the broader range of skills that I needed,
Mhm.
and I could have started some of those things much sooner, and maybe even achieved leadership roles sooner in my career
Mm.
than I did. Um, so that's one thing I like to think about. And then another thing I think to consider is there is an over reliance on certification programs.
Mhm.
I fell into that trap and I got every certification I could possibly get. I even fall into that trap when I talk to my kids who are in technology and talk about, hey, what certifications have you tried to get? And they look at me a little weird and they're like, what do you mean certification?
Like who?
And I don't know, it's still a big thing. Like Microsoft has got tons of certifications, Cisco's got
Right.
lots of certifications. All the companies that have a big product that's been out there for a while have their own
Yeah.
certification program, right? Or there's some independent company that gives you a certificate, right? Um, and I'm not saying those are bad, but I will say I have learned in my own experience, myself included, that it is completely possible to get a certification and not really understand the technology.
Yes, totally, totally. Yes. Having gotten certifications myself, there's a
Yeah,
disparate understanding of how you apply that technology in the real world
that's
versus like
right.
how you actually learn and test for it. So
That's
totally agree.
That's a huge thing. And so I had to learn that as a manager, that people I hired. So I hired an individual at one of my places. I'm not going to say where
Mm.
because I don't want to like out somebody
Totally fine. Yeah.
who interviewed amazingly and knew everything inside and out and actually taught it at a local community college. And so we were like,
Wow.
you are going to be the coder we need because we have one deep position
Yeah.
in this remote location away from the main headquarters, and we need you. And so we all interviewed him. Everybody loved him. We hired him, and he could not connect the dots and make a solution.
Oh no.
He
Yeah.
knew everything practically. Like he knew
Hmm.
the rule, he knew how to write the code. He couldn't figure out how to problem solve the solution and
Mm,
and put the different things together to make it work. And
hmm.
it
And
was
that's a skill in
eye-opening for
itself.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was eye-opening for me that the certificate engine, if you will, out there
Yeah.
really can hide that somebody doesn't actually know how to execute.
Yeah.
They only know how to learn. So some food for thought.
No, that's really interesting. It's funny. I was like, I downloaded the Microsoft Learn poster the other day. I was like, oh, just like what certificates are out there today? I was just curious, but funny that we're talking
Oh,
about
and
it.
I'm not saying I stopped getting those. I got my Power or Platform certification, right? I still do the Microsoft certifications. I still do
Completely.
as a couple other companies whenever I think about it. But I'm doing that as kind of on a side,
Yeah. And
right?
because you enjoy it
And
probably too.
I don't even put them on my resume anymore.
Right. It's
Uh,
because you like doing it. You like that kind of
right.
stuff. You like kind of tinkering around. So I feel like that's probably why, which makes sense because you need a lot of time to study anyways for it, right? So
Yeah.
um uh, did you know that you wanted to be what you're doing today? Like when you first fresh out of high school, like did you know like this is what I want to do, or did you have like no clue? You kind of
No
like
clue.
luckily like fell into this, right?
Yeah, no clue. I would say even when I transitioned in the Air Force from being a police officer to going into computers, I didn't have a clue what that even meant, right? I knew I had messed around and coded solutions and built stuff and it worked.
Hmm.
But there was so much learning that followed after that that I didn't realize what I didn't know. And then even after the Air Force, right, doing, yeah, everywhere I've gone,
Hmm.
it was never planned. I mean, I planned to be software development for a while, but once I got into government, here's a really interesting thing in government. Not very many agencies, not many, at least certainly the ones I've been to, hire developers.
Hmm.
And if they do, they're very constrained in what it is they do.
Hmm.
So I was very lucky when I got hired at my first government job because I did real coding. But
Hmm.
very soon thereafter, while I was there, I built out a center of excellence and we hired a contractor team to do it.
Wow.
And because that agency actually happened to be fee for service, we sold that service to our other people in our agency and other USDA agencies.
Oh
And
wow.
so I built out, based on my experience having been a consultant building solutions for government, we built
Yeah.
out a service department in that agency that solved our problems, but also could solve everybody else's problems who wanted to take advantage of it. And
Wow.
it was a very interesting thing to do, and was my first experience kind of being the lead in that respect. Um, but that was the last time I
Yeah.
did coding as a job. Everything after
Yeah.
that, I was a manager. And um, so even when I thought my software engineering was going to be my career, right, it wasn't. It didn't end up being. And then when I said, okay, well now I want management to be my career, I did do. I was a little more, okay, how do I take advantage of the position I land in? Like even when I went to
Okay.
government printing office, I picked that job because I wanted to work for Chuck, not because I wanted to do enterprise management. I didn't want to, not because I wanted to do all those things.
Hmm.
But once I got the job, I tried to do all those things to the best of my ability and learn every aspect
Okay.
of something I never knew before. And so that's something else I would tell people looking back, not something to change, but something I just did, which was just figure it out.
Yeah.
I never said I'm not applying for a job because I never did it before. When I applied for that job at Khaki, I had never professionally done any
Yeah.
software development ever. I'd only done it because I learned it. And I applied for the job and told them, yeah, of course I'm a software developer. I totally lived the confidence of a software developer, and I learned it all on the as I went. Um,
It sounds like I hate saying this, but the McDonald's methodology of like how it was like, even though you're getting paid for it at the time, just to go learn and you learned everything on
yeah,
the job. I
yeah,
feel like that secretly kind of stuck with you because I was hearing a lot of that throughout all the answers. It was like, oh wait, he also learned this, he also learned that. I was like, oh, interesting. Okay. Hmm.
yeah.
Now I need to go eat a burger and support
Ooh, I love their
dairy.
cheeseburgers still.
So what's next for you? Like what's coming up in the new year? Like what are you looking forward to? What's happening?
Yeah, so I think this next year is going to be interesting. With the administration change, in government, that's gonna be interesting. There'll be a lot of change, which I'm ready for. I'm a positive optimist, so we will make the best of any situation. And
Yeah.
if one of the things I've tried to do in government is be better in everything that I've done and find a way to be more efficient, to be more cost effective. So if the new administration brings that, I'm on board. I'm all in. And sometimes that means you put yourself out of a job, and that's what I'll do. I don't really care. I'll find another thing to do. I just roll with it. But otherwise, I'm still active as a speaker in the Microsoft space. I'm speaking at the M365 Community Days DC on February 21st. If you're in the DC area, we'll put a link in the description to come to that event. It's a one-day event hosted at the Microsoft Arlington office, and there will be a lot of sessions focused on government. Rima's going to speak at that event as well. And so that's a big thing coming up. I'm an organizer for that event, so I have to promote it. And we'll continue to. This our second annual one-day conference, and we are hoping to make it bigger and bigger. Who knows? Maybe we'll get to 2 days eventually. But other than that, I do speak on panels in the DC area at a variety of organizations.
Yeah.
I reach out, I participate, and so I'm looking forward to whatever new opportunity. I never say no, and I just grab the bull by the horns and just run out there and do whatever's next.
I think that's what's the most amazing thing about you, Jeremy. Like you're always open to new things. And I think that's what makes you so dynamic and so fascinating and also so educated in this space. I know just the advice you've given to other government guests that we've had on our podcast has been absolutely phenomenal. This is so great. Well, thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate it. Is there anything else that you feel that we didn't discuss that you would like to talk about? Like I have one final burning question, by the way. Did you learn German when you were in Germany as a kid? Like, do you speak German? Is it a
I
real thing?
don't currently speak German, although I have a few words, certainly all the cuss words. I have all the cuss words down pat. I will say that when you go to a DoD school, you
Uh-huh.
have to learn the host language.
Oh, I did not know that.
So
Okay,
we did all learn
interesting.
the language. There was a time in my life that I was as fluent as an American can be.
Wow.
And then my parents were learned it inside and out. And so yeah, I did know German, and when I hear people speak it, I can understand a lot of it.
Oh, that's
But
cool.
the ability to roll my R's and make the sounds, it's that's a thing you lose if you don't practice. So not
Well, I'm
anymore.
sure you're very helpful at a German restaurant when ordering, so we'll have
There
to
we
we'll
go.
have to next. But yeah, awesome. Thank you. So anything else that you want to cover? I know,
Nope.
thank you for answering my burning question. That was really very important.
No, I think we're good. I want to thank the audience for listening to my story. I know this is a slightly different take on the podcast. So this is the 200th episode, and I wanted to try to do something different. Rima, I want to thank you so much for
Oh,
interviewing me and being a good friend, and look forward to seeing what's coming up for you next as well.